For the year 2020, I'm making a video review for every new movie I watch, whether in theaters or at home, and on June 14th, I watched Just Mercy. Welcome to my year in movies. This is Talking to Myself. So, Just Mercy, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, is a film about Bryan Stevenson, who is a defense attorney fresh out of law school who decides to play life on hard mode by leaving his Delaware home and moving down south to Alabama so he can specifically represent poor people. When he arrives, he meets Walter Johnny D. McMillan, a man who's on death row for the murder of a white girl, a crime he didn't commit. So this film is free to stream through the month of June on YouTube, and that's how I watched it, but it's also free on a number of other streaming platforms. I highly recommend watching it. There are lots of issues and terms floating around, and while we do have lots of faces connected to this cause, we see specifically how the justice system and the prison system affects people through this film. And it's a really good way to introduce yourself to the grand scheme of how this issue is played out. And it's an eye-opening, heart-rending movie, but I would not let that deter you from jumping into it, because at this point in time, it's more necessary viewing than ever before. So before I get into my numerous positives, the only negative I can really give for it is more from a technical standpoint, and that's something that I wouldn't have noticed on first viewing. It's filmed kind of in a generic way. It's very similar to television. I think that's apt in some ways to have it feel almost like a mini series, and in some ways it lets the performances shine, which I think are kind of the big, strong heavyweights of the film, or the performances. And there's not a weak link in the performances, but I want to specifically highlight Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, and Rob Morgan. So, of course, Michael B. Jordan is perfect. He captures that young, bright idealism that Bryan had, and he balances a naivete for just how corrupt the system is with balancing that with knowing he's black, knowing he's in Alabama now, and knowing that that presents a lot of challenges on its own. Jamie Foxx, this is easily one of Jamie Foxx's best performances. He captures the highs and lows that McMillan goes through just with extreme humanity. He does a really good job in the role. But in a film of tremendous performances, the standout for me was Rob Morgan as Herbert Richardson. As a bit of background, Herbert Richardson, through his eyes, we see the tragedy of death row through the eyes of someone who feels like he deserves it. But we also see the infuriating failure of his trial. Richardson was a Vietnam War veteran who, upon seeing his entire squad killed in Vietnam, came back with crippling PTSD, and that affected how he interacted with people. And after he placed a bomb on someone's front porch that was detonated by someone else, he feels tremendous guilt because he knew it was wrong to have the bomb there, but he also didn't mean for it to hurt other people. And it's a complicated thing, because for someone without PTSD, I can look at that situation and say that's terrible, that's awful, we might even call that evil. But it represents the fact that he's in prison, the fact that he dealt with PTSD through a very weak VA system instead of getting help that he really needed. That shows a failure that we see still today. The police are required to handle situations revolving around mental health when they aren't qualified to do so. If you're interested in seeing more about Black veterans from Vietnam specifically, Spike Lee's latest films, Da 5 Bloods, actually covers that topic, but there's also the oral history, Bloods, Black Veterans in the Vietnam War, which was compiled by Wallace Terry. Rob Morgan's just fantastic in the part, and the film as a whole does a good job by being about racism and not just a racist. While Rafe Spall kind of plays a cartoonish interpretation of Tommy Chapman, the prosecutor, it's not just Tommy Chapman that presents a problem to Bryan and the work that he's doing. It's the whole state of Alabama. It's the whole criminal justice system, because the sheriff, the police department, the people around Bryan and his partner Eva Ansley are all working against them. And I think the key line that demonstrates that is after Chapman gives Bryan a woefully inadequate folder to help him with the case and all but derails his investigation. He gives a throwaway line about, oh, you're new in town, you should go see the To Kill a Mockingbird Museum. It's a landmark in civil rights. That demonstrates the problem is not just a racist, it's the whole culture. It's a system that demands compliance. And to uphold that system by having an all-white jury, or coercing a falsified testimony from a white felon in order to get him a lesser sentence just so you can convict a black man for a crime he didn't commit. And the film is absolutely gut-wrenching. Like, I was tearing up 8 minutes into the film, but I spent the entire back half of the movie with just bawling these guttural, deep, ugly sobs, curled in the fetal position on my couch. Because it's based on a true story. Like, I cried at Shawshank, but that's, based on a short story. It's not based in reality, much apart from the prison system being corrupt. Here we see real lives being derailed and ruined from the whole prison system. Coming into it, I knew nothing about Stevenson's story. I guessed that Stevenson would probably survive, and I was pretty sure McMillan might. But nothing was guaranteed, and so whenever their safety was threatened, there was real fear there. When Bryan Stevenson is asked to strip before going in to visit his clients at the prison, even though lawyers aren't supposed to be strip searched, I was afraid for him. When he's pulled over late at night by the police, held at gunpoint so they can riffle through his case documents, there's real fear there. And when Bryan's work partner, Eva Ansley, receives a phone call telling her that there's a bomb under her house because she's working with a black lawyer, there's real fear there. Ultimately, you get to the end and you see some justice being done, and it helps knowing that Bryan Stevenson's work still continues to this day. But we are only now, I think, really starting to get to the deep, deep roots of this problem. And we're going to be dealing with it for a really long time unless fundamental things change. But speaking of Bryan Stevenson's work, to kind of put a positive spin on this, I have links in the description to the work that Bryan does in relation to this topic. The Equal Justice Initiative kind of does what the name implies. They're committed to criminal justice reform and making sure that people receive the justice that's due them. They want to end mass incarceration and excessive punishments, especially things like mandatory minimums. They are actively involved in challenging racial and economic injustice, and they are about protecting human rights of the most vulnerable. And they do extensive research. They actually released a report recently about the Reconstruction era in America, looking at the kind of crime that was perpetuated against Black Americans in the years following the Civil War and the 13th Amendment. So I highly encourage you to check out their work. I've got a link to their donation page in the description. I myself am donating, so I highly encourage you to do if you can. But if you're interested in learning more about the topic, Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th is available on YouTube through the month of June, but is on Netflix otherwise. And if you're more of a book person, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness is a very necessary read on the topic. I highly recommend starting with this film, as it really gets into the prison system, the justice system, and how calling it the justice system is sometimes not the most accurate assessment. So I highly encourage you to check it out. Again, the movie is free. It's right there. We're all on YouTube. So please check it out if you can. Yeah. This has been My Year in Movies. Thank you for watching.